This is Conversation 5. Bob leaves policing to become a defense attorney when a strange character named Count Dante enters the 18th District Police Station and asks for Bob's legal assistance. Count Dante is a character from a Quentin Tarantino movie, a flamboyant time bomb who died mysteriously, but not before he started the Dojo Wars and was involved with the largest armored bank heist in U.S. history. Bob reveals never-before-told details about the heist and the Count's death. Sit back and enjoy episode 5. Bob, take us to that moment when you break from the police force.
I was a policeman. I wanted to get my law degree. And then when I transferred up to the 18th District and met with Rick Borelli and got connected with all those mob guys and gamblers and bookmakers, and I started making a lot of money, I'm not even thinking in terms of the future. My future is right now. I'm making tons of money. That's when Count Dante shows up there at the police station. I knew who he was only from reading the newspapers. In fact, I knew that he had been arrested and charged with murder for breaking into the Kung Fu school.
Let's set the table a little bit around this. So you've got your law degree. You're a police officer.
No, I didn't have it at that time.
But you're a police officer at this moment in time. You've had this accident. You come back. And you were supposed to work Vice. You teamed up with Borelli. The gambling escapades mushroomed or really began in earnest at this moment in time. In comes this gentleman to the police station named the Count. Tell us who the Count is.
Count Dante was advertised as the world's deadliest hairdresser. He was involved with karate, where apparently he had been banned from the tournaments because he was too brutal. He had also written a book, The Black Hand, teaching people how to pretty much destroy people just using his hands. People began to believe this guy was something else in terms of a physical specimen.
He was this kind of not cult figure, but a known quantity in Chicago because there were articles about him or there were advertisements about him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a pet mountain lion. That was his pet. He had a pet mountain lion that he lived with.
Tiger King before the Tiger King.
Yeah, right. He was connected with the people in Playboy, and he was known by a lot of the very interesting people in Chicago.
Now I'm looking at a picture of Count Dante. He's a suave, handsome guy. His name, Count Juan Rafael Dante, was an American martial artist figure during the 60s and 70s who claimed to do extraordinary feats such as Dim Mak. I don't know what that is. He's born John Timothy Keehan in Chicago in 1939. But you knew of him because he kind of had this cult status, and he was a character on the scene, and he was tied into Hugh Hefner, and we should note that the Playboy Mansion probably at this moment in time was still situated in Chicago. He's kind of this known, I wouldn't say celebrity, but a known figure. And he comes into the police station one day.
He had been arrested and charged with murder for the incident there at the Green Dragon up in Fullerton, where he had gone in there and ripped the door off the hinges and gone in there and he ripped somebody's eye out. And his friend Jim Koncevic, who had gone in there with him, had a spear put through him. And as they ran down the street, he died. And they charged him with murder under the accountability statute because he had gone in there. And the Green Dragon it wasn't a karate school. It was a place where they taught people how to use maces and spears and daggers. And when he went in there, I think there were about 15 or 20 of the students in there, and they're all armed.
It's like a dojo, like this is like the kind of Bruce Lee era, like a dojo in Chicago, where these guys are guns are too easy for them, right? So they're resorting to martial arts.
They train people with maces, the maces with that ball and chain thing, and with spears and with daggers. And these people were all armed when he broke in there. And he went in there with 4 of his students. What had happened was, the guy from there had called him a pussy. He had a couple of schools himself, karate schools, and he was taking students from this guy, and this guy called him up and called him a pussy. And with that, he went over there, and this guy was busy training a class. So, I mean, it was front page news, and it was a big splash with that.
Sounds like not only is it front page news, it sounds like a comedy routine. So he's basically siphoning out this other guy's clientele, and he gets a call, and the guy calls him a pussy. So he goes up there with his mace carriers, and they go to a school where there's a bunch of guys who have all kinds of weapons and whatnot.
They didn't come in there armed. They came in there, you know, these were his students with plain old karate, and the Count wasn't armed. He pulled the guy's eye out with his hand.
When he comes into the police station, you're there.
I was out in the street patrolling, and I get a call to come into the station. So, okay, you get calls all the time. I had no idea what that was. Maybe somebody needed me to do something there in that area or whatever. I came in there, and it was so ironic. As I walk in, you come in there at the 18th district through the back. The parking lot is in the back of the station. There's a long hallway, and you can see the front desk, you know, from the back. And as I walk in there, I see this strange-looking character. I see this guy. Well, you saw his picture there, but he's wearing a cape, and he's wearing a mesh see-through outfit. You know, where you can see his whole body basically.
And he's got this very meticulously manicured beard that has 6 or 7 points and shapes. He's really an interesting looking guy, and he's a handsome guy too. Must have been quite the ladies' man.
Piercing blue eyes, as I remember he had. You know, but you know, I just see him standing there at the desk, and you know, I look at him because this guy looks like some kind of a freak. You know, he looks like some kind of a just plain old character. He's dressed like a Superman or whatever. And I walk behind the desk, and the sergeant says, "Here, Bob, somebody wants to talk to you." And, I look up and I walk over, and he goes, he says, "I'm Count Dante." He said, and I'd like to talk to you. And when he mentioned I'm Count Dante, then I recall, his picture in the front page, and I realize who he is. And he says, "John Deegan told me," he's a friend of yours. "John told me that you're in law school and that you had taken the bar." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, John told me he's sure you passed it. And did you get the results yet?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I just got arrested not that long ago." And then I said, "Yeah, I remember reading that." And he said, "I'd like to hire you as my attorney." And I said, I'm not an attorney yet." I said, "I haven't got the results from the bar." He said, "Well," he said, I just have a lot of confidence that you can help me." He said.
So is this the first person that's ever solicited you to do legal work?
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. I mean, how could somebody solicit me when I'm not even a lawyer?
Yeah. And to this point, had it ever crossed your mind that you were going to become a defense attorney, or you're in this moment of policing and the gambling and things are great, and you're not looking 2 inches in front of your schedule? This is what you're doing at this moment.
Actually, I had already been contacted by someone. In fact, it was John. It was John Deegan, the kid I grew up with, who by now is a multimillionaire. John is involved in the tax shelter business with Troopin. With Barry Troopin, and I think Trump too was involved with Rothschild of New York. And John got involved with them. He had that special license, and he was selling tax shelters, and he had become a multimillionaire. John had already contacted me on somebody else who had a DUI. I had told John, "Okay, if I pass the bar, I'll represent him." And he told this guy to go in there and get a continuance on his case. But now the Count shows up. And I have no idea. I never asked either the Count or John how the two of them had initially met. I just know that he said, "I'd like to hire you." And I said, "But what if I don't pass the bar?" And he said, "Well," he said, "you could." John tells me you have a lot of contacts, and John has a lot of faith in you. And he said that he thinks you could find somebody else that could help him. So he pulls out $5,000, and he said, I'd like to hire you right now. I'm making a lot of money at this time, but still $5,000, giving some stranger like this. And anyhow, he said, "Well, I'd like to retain you." And he retains me. In fact, he said, "When you get off work tonight," he said, "I'd like to take you over to the Playboy Club." And that's what happened. When I finished up, I took a day off of doing anything else, and I went with him and his girlfriend, Krista, And I had a girl, one of the girls that I was dating, and I went over to the Playboy Club.
Is that the first time you'd been to the Playboy Club?
Oh yeah, I never belonged to it before that.
So kind of a high-end, exclusive, invite-only type of place that you had to get in under special circumstances or be friends with Hugh Hefner, or you paid to get in?
It's a private club that I just had no interest. I was meeting plenty of girls, and we had Butch McGuire's in a couple of spots where I'm going to all the time, where almost every day I'm finding somebody new. But when we went there, it was really kind of strange, because all these talking to the people about, this is my friend Bob Cooley. He's a policeman. He's in law school right now. And he says, and he's one of the toughest. He says he's one of the toughest people I've ever met. Now, I just met him for the first time, a couple hours before. But he tells him, he said he was a policeman out there, and I read all about him. And I think I told you, what it all happened from there, with him being involved in that Purolator thing, and they were going to kill him and so forth and so on. We discussed that before, didn't we?
No. I don't believe so.
Because this is really, really important.
Absolutely. Divert away.
I started running around with the Count all the time. He would contact me 2-3 times a week, and we would go to the Playboy Club. We would go to other places, and he was constantly getting into fights and starting fights and getting me involved in them too.
Was he mob related, or was he just an individual who was kind of a one-man wrecking crew and kind of spun out?
This is why, see, what you're saying is interesting. He wanted all the time. I took him one time out with me to the western suburbs with these people. And these people all knew who he was, and wow, and he wanted to be introduced to him and meet him, and I would not do that. I saw nothing good coming of it. And this is what's so really interesting. Tell you how bizarre this guy was. He calls me. We go to a party out there. It was at a motel on like 55th and Lakeshore Drive. And I'm meeting different girls all the time at Butch McGuire's. It's an absolute pickup place. And I'm with a girl I had just met the night before. And you want to go to a party? It was on a Sunday. You want to go to a party? And it was a Bears party. After the football game, we go out to this place in 55th Street. When we get out of the car and we go up there, this area is all black now. And we go walking through the areaway to the motel. It's a 2-story motel. And as we're walking to the area, there's a couple of black guys standing there with shotguns, and they've got there for security. We go upstairs, we go past them, we go up to the second floor. There were 2 separate rooms there with like an areaway just going from one to the other as you walk in there. We're the only white people there. Count myself and the 2 girls we've got. I'm in one. After about maybe 15, 20 minutes, he's introducing me to all the people. He knew a lot of them, and they're all crowding around him. When he shows up, he's like the star attraction. And these are all the Chicago Bears, but he's the star attraction. I wind up in the second room where they had food and where they had, the liquor and the beer and all the rest of it. And I'm with the girl I'm with, and I hear the Count in the other room, Spade. He called me Spade Cooley, is what he called me. That was his nickname for me. Spade, get in here. Holy Christ. I go back around. He pulls me over next to him, and he says, Spade and I will take on all you fucking he said. I remember I'm standing there looking at Willie Holman. Willie Holman is about 3 feet in front of me. Willie Holman is about 300 pounds, one of the Bears. But these are all the Bear football players and friends of theirs. Me and Spade will take on every one of you fuck. And thank God nobody took him up on it, because we would have gotten the living hell beat out of us. But I mean, that was the Count. That's how nuts this guy was. Why
were people drawn to him, but also why was he so volatile and self-destructive?
Well, who knows? I mean, when you say why, he was just a strange character. Explaining the Count, I'll tell you how this whole thing ended really in a bizarre situation where we've been running around now for about 3 or 4 months. When his case goes to trial now, I take a bench trial. The Count thought the case was being fixed. I never told him it was being fixed. I just said, we'll go to trial, and I think the judge's name was Delaney. It was an Irish judge.
But now hold on. This is the case where he and his 3 students went up to the torture chamber to fight these other guys. This is where there was the death. So you now at this point are an attorney, and you take a bench trial.
And we go in there. I take a bench trial, and the reason I felt comfortable doing it, either way, if we win it or if we lose it, the judge was a judge I had known from when I was a policeman, just being in his court, and whatever. And he seemed like a fair guy, and he was an Irish guy. I had seen him and some other judges at parties I was going to, at these different, judges' parties. I took the case to trial, and I won the case. And now he's happy as can be. You saved my life and all the rest of it. And we're running around until one day.
No, wait, hold on. Why do you think you won this case?
I just did. The first major case that I had, and I won it because I'm a terrific lawyer. That's probably why. But it's not that he killed somebody. They went in there, obviously, yes. One of the guys put a spear through his friend, who was then killed and charged under the accountability statute. I felt uncomfortable taking it to a jury. And as I said, because I knew the judge just to see him, and, I had some conversations with him, and I felt that even if he found him guilty, he wouldn't put him in prison. He could maybe find him guilty of a lesser included, but it was just what I did.
Was there a tacit understanding between you and the judge, or this is just a feeling? This is a feeling that you have because you know this judge and you know his temperament, that you make a call to go to a bench versus a jury.
When I say I know him to see him at parties and whatever, like I would see dozens of other people. And he seemed like he was a big drinker and a happy-go-lucky sort. I felt that, if he found him guilty, I didn't think he'd put him in prison. I just didn't think he would, based on the facts of the case. The county had no prior background, had never been arrested before for anything, etc. After I won the case, I'm getting a lot of all kinds of business because the count is telling everybody. In fact, what the count was telling people was that I'm a mechanic, and he says he's a mechanic. He can fix anything. The count to the day he died thought I fixed the case. I didn't fix the case. I just tried it, and I won the case. Even after that, I started winning my juries and the rest of it.
Wait, hold on. Have you resigned from the police force by this time?
Oh, yeah, certainly. In fact, I resigned from the police department about maybe 3 months before that, and the only reason I resigned when I did was because the very next day I had a case in traffic court. I had a DUI case that John had referred to me in traffic court. I resigned on a Sunday and I was in court Monday as an attorney. I had no office.
Did you have any hesitations?
Oh, no, not at all. You have to understand, I've got boxes full of money. Money is, I'm making all kinds of money with the gambling that I'm doing. And no, I had no reservations at all. When I went in there, I never talked to anybody or whatever. I just tried the case, and I figured that, they all knew me. All those judges and all knew me as a policeman. I had been in those courts even up maybe a week before, 2 weeks before I'm there as a policeman. Now I come walking in as an attorney. I filed my appearance. And when I walk out in the hall afterwards, Jimmy Lefevre stops me. Jimmy Lefevre was the chief judge there in traffic court, was Richard Lefevre. Jimmy Lefevre was his cousin, who it turns out, well, I didn't know, but I find out now was his bag man. And he said to me at that stage, he said, the first one was on the house. From now on, when you come in here, you see me. And I knew exactly what that meant. Okay. And I walked away.
What did that mean exactly?
You go see him and you go see him and you make arrangements. You make arrangements to get the case thrown out.
Walk me through, if you will, that the mash. Like, how did that work exactly? Give me like a sample case.
The whole system there was a business. Traffic court was an absolute business. I find all this out later. The judges were paying to get a courtroom there. There were in the building you had I'd say about maybe 15 or 20 courtrooms. There were 4 of them, and on the bottom floor you had four courtrooms were what they call the major courtrooms. And there was a 5th courtroom there that they called a jury court for all the misdemeanors, not just, traffic, but all the misdemeanors, and where they had juries. The major courtrooms were where you had the DUIs, the leaving the scene of an accident, the serious accidents. All the serious charges were heard only in these 4 courtrooms. The judges actually paid a certain amount of money to get that courtroom for the month. They paid the chief judge to get assigned to that courtroom because they would only have it for a month at a time, different judges. And supposedly they did this to keep it from being corrupt.
A judge would pay the chief judge to have one of those courtrooms. Was this common knowledge? Clearly, this is not legal.
Well, certainly it's not legal. I mean, it's not common knowledge to the world, but it's common knowledge to people, to the inner circle people. And it was common knowledge. It became common knowledge to me after I met Jimmy. When I became partners with Johnny, and when I became involved with the first ward, I became involved with the people that were setting all this up. It was an actual business. It came out during those trials, during the Grey Lord trials. This information came out, but I knew from the start what was going on there. What I would do when I first started practicing in that court, if I had a case coming up, I would see Jimmy. I would, get a hold of him and, I've got a case coming up on such and such a date. He'd insist that he be told, in 3 or 4 days ahead of time. And I'd tell him what the case was. And he'd say, what kind of a case DUI? Well, what kind of a case, meaning how strong a case do they have? Because I'd have the police reports, and I'd indicate, no, it's not strong at all. There's, they show swaying, staggering, etc. And he'd say, okay. And I said, what do you need? And he said, I need, $100 for a minor thing, $100, and I need $50 for the policeman, and I need $20 for myself, is what he would tell me. So it cost $170. I would go into the court on that particular court date. I'd walk up there. The case would go to trial. They'd be found not guilty, and I'd see Jimmy afterwards, and I'd take care of him. As I said, that was the system over there. That's how it worked. But it turned out judges were paying to get those courtrooms because they would make X amount of money, and it became a total business.
When you go into this system, are you disgusted that this is the way it goes, or you've already been desensitized because you've been through it as a police officer, so you know something's afoot, you just don't know it to what degree?
I myself, I would have loved it if the system was legitimate, because I could go in there and in fact I did. I won over 95% of my jury trials. I won cases one after the other that people dreamed about and never dreamed could be won. I wish it was straight, but it wasn't. There were certain courtrooms there, especially traffic court, and there were a couple of other courts where you paid or you lost. On cases you should have won, you would have lost. I mean, it was just part of the system. And I went along with it. I went along with it because it was a lot easier to try a case and dispose of it than having to go to a jury and take all that time and all that effort. But I mean, that was the system. It was as corrupt as could be in certain courtrooms. Not all of them, but in certain courtrooms. Anyhow, let's get back in the count. Afterwards, we're running around. We're having a great time.
This is after the count is acquitted.
Oh, after he's acquitted, yeah. After he's acquitted now and he's a free man, it's And until one day, and this has been going on now for like a year, and I'm making all kinds of great contacts in the money world. I'm involved now over at Faces. I'm going into Faces, one of the nightclubs, where I'm getting all kinds of business from the people I'm meeting in there. I was out with the Count having dinner. We're heading over to my place, and we pull up at Dearborn and Division. We're going north, and there's a stoplight there. As we go to stop, I'm talking with him. He's got a convertible now. He's got a brown convertible with Count Dante crest on the side of it. He's wearing one of his goofy cape outfits. He's got a cape on. It's a cape and one of those mesh see-through outfits he's wearing. And he looks like a freak out there in the street, if you don't know who he is. And he taps his car. He barely taps it because he's talking to me and he's slowly slowing down. He barely taps it. And there's 4 guys in the car. And when he does that, he puts his hands up. He puts his hands up in the air like, gee, I'm sorry. And 2 of the guys had gotten out of the car, had jumped out of their car and headed back towards us. And one of them said something like, "You fucking freak," or something like that. Now, all this is taking place within about a minute, maybe not even that. And when that happens, the Count jumps straight out of the car, and I'm in the back seat. I jump after him, and suddenly the other 2 had gotten out of the car. Somebody must have recognized the Count. Then all 4 of them suddenly turned around, got in the car, ran through the red light and took off. We get back in the car and we drive over to my place and we go back over to my house. We go upstairs and we're upstairs in my apartment and I'm on the couch sitting next to my girlfriend and John is sitting across the way, and I had gotten him a glass of wine, and we're sitting down, and the Count said, Bob, tell her how tough you are. And, because, she had said something about, wow, that was, that was really close, about, that could have been a problem or something. And then the Count says to me, tell her how tough you are, Bob. And I just said, that's okay. And he said, no, tell her how tough you are. And a second time, I just, I brushed him off. He came walking over towards me and with his left hand, he made a motion and I thought he broke my jaw. He hit my jaw with his fingers and I thought he broke my jaw. And, and I'm like in a state of shock and suddenly he grabs his hand and he says, I should cut off this hand. You saved my life. And he said, you're the closest person in the world to me. And, and he's crying. And I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck? And then he goes over and he goes against the wall. He stands up there against not the wall, the windows. He says, get out your gun. He said, Bob, point it at me and say now before you pull the trigger and I'll stop the bullet. And I look at him. I'm thinking to myself, this guy is off the deep, going straight off the deep end. He had been acting a little strange over the last maybe week or two or three, and I suspected now maybe he's doing some drugs a little bit rather than just from drinking. That was the end of my running around with the Count after that. I basically wanted to try to, in fact, when he would call and let's get together, I avoided him and I stopped running around with him. I'm worried that this guy is just, losing it. So it's about maybe 2 or 3 months after this. I'm in the office and I get a call from Joey Casello. Now, Joey Casello was one of the guys that went to the Green Dragon with him, a big, tough Italian kid who had become a real close friend of mine. He was the only one of those other guys. He lived on the South Side. And the reason I got real tight with him, too, because he was a bookmaker himself. He was a bookmaker and into gambling. He's not running around with the Count and I when we go out, but he's become a good friend of mine. He also owned a car dealership in partnership with the Count. He owned a car dealership over on Southwestern Avenue. And Joey calls me and he said, Bob, he said, you got to come over here. Some guys came over here. They're going to kill the Count. I said, what? He said, please take a ride over here. Now, at the dealership, this is where he kept his mountain lion now because he was getting too big. He was getting too big for the apartment, so he had the mountain lion in a huge cage there in the dealership. They had a building there. They had a trailer outside, and they had a real big car dealership. They had probably about, I'd say, close to about 100 cars there in the lot. It was a huge business. And he tells me a couple of guys came in here and got out and went in the trunk of the car, and they come in with shotguns looking for the Count. And I said, who were these guys? Do you know them? And he said, yeah. He said, Pete Gucci and Sammy Anarino. And I said, I don't know who they are. Who are they with? And he said, they're with Jimmy the Bomber. I said, what was this about? He said, apparently the Count extorted a sex shop. It was a place over there in Old Town where they sold these toys that you can screw. They look like female dolls, big dolls, and where they sell porno films and all the rest of it. Big money makers at the time. Some Jewish guy had it, and the Count came in there and just basically extorted it from him.
He extorted sex toys or extorted money from
the business. No, he took over the business.
The Count just decided, I'm going to take this business over.
I didn't ask all the facts. All I know is he took over the guy's business and never paid him. Or maybe he told him he'd pay him and he just didn't, but he had taken over the guy's business. And
it's safe to assume that these businesses are run by the Chicago outfit.
No. This guy had gone to Jimmy. Jimmy the Bomber was one of the main mob bosses, from the old time mob bosses. And he still had his own crew of people. He obviously had gone to them to get the business back, and they were doing what they were doing. Anyhow, what I did was I went over and saw Marco, and I said, these guys? He said, yeah, and he says, yeah, again, they're part of. We'll be talking about how they ran the mob business. That's an unbelievable story in itself too. But he said, I'll make contact with them, and I'll arrange for you to have a meeting, and you can get this straightened out. They arranged to have me meet with those two guys over at a motel over there by the racetrack, over by Sportsman's Park up on Cicero. There's a motel about maybe a block and a half south of the racetrack where they have a restaurant up on the second floor. So that's the place that I'm told I'm going to go meet him. Anyhow, I get a hold of the Count, and for the first time in his life, I saw the Count was nervous. He was real nervous. And so I take him over there. And when I go in, now it turns out I had owned my restaurant by that time. I had bought Greco's by that time. These guys, as well as all kinds of others, were regular customers there. Now, I didn't know them by name. I had seen these guys many times over there at the restaurant. They knew who I was. I didn't know them, but they knew who I was. So when I go in there, I talk to Pete Gucci. I leave the Count sitting with Sammy Iannarino, and we go back and we talk. And he tells me, yeah, with this guy, that's what he said. This guy, extorted the place, just took it over. We want to be paid for it. I said, you get me the paperwork that and we'll buy it for $25,000. The deal was we'll buy it for $25,000, and we'll get this thing straightened out. Okay. We go back over to the table, and when I get to the table, these names will be very interesting later on. Sammy Iannarino is sitting there, and he's got his thumb over a fork, and he's putting his thumb over the fork, and he's telling, and I hear this part of it. Just as we walk up, he says, and I pull out eyes with this. And the Count says to him, and I pull out eyes with my hands, and he's making that gesture he made in that book, The Black Hand. And I said, what the fuck is going on? Come on, enough of this bullshit. And I take the Count, and off we go. Anyhow, we get this deal all worked out, and I think that's and hopefully that's the end of it. And go about my business and whatever. And I don't see the Count again after this for a while. It's probably about maybe 3 or 4 months. I'm in the office one day. In fact, I'm playing cards. I'm playing gin with Jerry Worksman and a couple of the others. And the Count comes in. It's about maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock, and the Count shows up, and he comes walking into the office, and Bob, can I talk to you about something? And okay, and I break off from the card game, and I go back and into another section of the office, and he says, Bob, he said, you're one of the closest people in my life. He says, the only two people I ever loved were my father and you. I wasn't that crazy about my mother. and he said, I want to repay you. And I said, how's that? And he said, I've got a situation going. He said, if you want to, I want to get you involved, and your end will be $1 million cash. I don't know what he's talking about. He may just be, he was a little bit high at the time. It seemed like he was a little bit high. His eyes were a little glassy. And I just said, John, I said, that's okay. I just assume not. What you can do is, I said, you make $2 million on it. And if I need money, I can borrow some from you. I said that I'm just not interested in the thing. And I go back, and okay, with that he leaves. I go, I'm doing my thing, playing cards. It's probably a week or two after that. I'm driving in the car, and I hear in the radio that there was a robbery. They thought about $10 million in cash from the Purolator company. The place is about a block and a half from the police station where I first met the Count. It's over there on, I think on Huron Street, which is a block from Chicago Avenue. That's where the Purolator robbery took place. That was the biggest money robbery of all time. Right away, I knew exactly what the Count was talking about. Now, I knew that somehow he was involved. Well, okay, so be it. I never say nothing to anybody about anything. It's about 2 or 3 days after that when I'm in the office.
Give me 1 second to kind of put a fine point on this. On October 21st, 1974, the largest cash robbery in the history of the universe is discovered early in the morning of this date at the Purolator Armored Express vaults at 127 West Huron Street. Over $4.3 million in unmarked bills is taken from one of the vaults. Gasoline bombs are left to explode and cover up any evidence, but a lack of oxygen in the vaults causes the fires to burn out quickly. That's the thumbnail of it.
Yep, that's the Purolator robbery. Oh, and it builds from here. It builds from here. The whole story and all the cast of characters. So anyhow, it's about 3 days after this, when I'm up in the office, I go up and we had a real big office up there. There were 4 of us that shared the office: Van Dorp, Worksman, myself, and I can't think of the other attorney. And we had a waiting room that usually had anywhere from 3 or 4 to 15, 20 people in there. I come walking in there, and who's sitting there but Pete Gucci? I says, Pete, what are you doing here? He's one of the guys out there who's whacking people and who's doing the collecting or whatever. And one of the, he's one of the 2 that I met there at the motel. He says, I'm here to see now. Jerry Worksman is he's an ex-U.S. attorney who's a very close friend and who I'm playing cards with all the time in our offices. He said, I'm there to see Jerry. And, okay. And then he says to me, you tell your friend the Count to stop calling me 4 o'clock in the morning. I got a wife and kids. And I says, Pete, what the fuck are you doing associating? Now, here's somebody that they were going to kill. I said, what are you doing associating with him? You got no bit. I said, nothing good is going to come of this. And I walk away. I hadn't talked to the Count since that meeting over there at the motel a couple months before. And the only time I saw him was when he came to see me, a couple of weeks before that, telling me he'll get me involved in something where my end will be $1 million in cash. It turns out he was there to see Jerry because he was the one that was involved in the Purolator deal. And what he had done when he saw Jerry that day, he had stashed $25,000 in Jerry's couch for bond money. Now, again, I don't know any of this stuff going on, about this. I know that the Count was involved, obviously, in that, based on him coming to see me and hearing there was a robbery. So anyhow, it turns out, like I said, that Pete Cucci was grabbed by the FBI and was cooperating with them. They indicated $1 million in cash was thrown out in front of Jimmy the Bomber's house. That was supposed to be his end of it. But again, okay, now I don't know all this stuff in the background that's going on. I'm at home about maybe another 2 or 3 days after that. I get a call from the Count. He calls me. He was living at that time. He was living in the same building as Alan Ackerman over on Lakeshore Drive, up there in North Lakeshore Drive. And he says, Bob, can you come by? I got to talk to you. Right away, I figured he must have, be worried now he's going to be arrested on this Purolator thing. That's my thought. I go over to his place and I'm taking this girl that I'm with, and we go up there, and he's high as a kite. Hey, Bob, how are you? Spade. How are you? Who's this? Oh, she's beautiful. And, and Krista's sitting at the kitchen table, and they were drinking wine. They had wine there. And, sit down. And we sit down, pours me a glass of wine, pours the girl a glass of wine. And then the Count says, here, let's go to, I want to show you something. And I figure he wants to talk to me now. We walk into the bedroom, and he says, you always thought I was a fuck up, he said. You always thought I was a fuck up, didn't you? What? He said, let me show you something. He opens his closet. He's got a huge box full of money. I mean, we're talking $100 bills. Huge. I mean, we're not talking a cigar box. I'm talking about something about maybe, I'd say about 3-4 feet up and all the way around, full of cash. And, okay, and I'm in my mind, okay, I know where some of the money is. We go back out in the front, and I look for an excuse to get out of there. Okay, John, I got to go someplace else. And we leave. When I get home, and I had 2 phones at home. I had, the regular phone, but I had another phone that I had put in because I was practicing, and I'd get a lot of calls from people to go get them bailed out of jail. And he calls me on the private line. And he says, Bob, Spade. He said, that money you saw? And I said, yeah. He said, that was counterfeit money. That wasn't real money. And John, I really don't care. So, anyhow, I think nothing more of it. I hang up, go about my business the next day. Next day, I get a call from Krista. It was early in the evening. And she says, you got to come over. You got to come over right now. I go over there. And here's the Count laying there dead on the floor. And holy Christ. And, what happened? And she said, a couple of people came up here. She said, she wasn't talking like I'm talking. She said, a couple of people came up here, and he told me to go in the other room, and he was with them for about 5-10 minutes, he said, and she said he came over, and I came out, and he walked over here, and then he fell over and he was dead. And when she told me that, I walk over into the bedroom, and I look in there, and the box is gone. The money is gone. And here's the Count laying there dead on the floor.
This is a hot crime scene, and she called you as an attorney and a friend of his. What's going through your mind? Do you want to get out of there, or are you in attorney mode?
No. Well, she also told me, I won't tell you the name, but she also told me that somebody else had come down, she said, and had gotten rid of some drugs that were there in the bathroom. And what I did was I called a friend of mine, Pete Granata. He owned a funeral home out there on the south side. This is one of the places where they were burning the bodies. This is where they were getting rid of this I had learned over a period of time. This is where the mob was cremating some of the people to get rid of them. They didn't want any more bodies to be found that were being found, where they had buried them. So I called Pete. And I said, Pete, you got to do me a favor. What's up? I said, you got to get over, and I tell him I'm over at such and such. And I gave him the address. I said, Count Dante he's dead. And can you pick up the body and bring it back there and bring it back to the funeral home? And when he gets there, I waited for him to come. He drove down there, and I said, look, see if you can keep an autopsy or whatever from taking place. I said, because, and I just left it in the hands of him and Krista. I just said, take care of it. And that's what happened.
And why no autopsy?
They just wanted him because I don't want there to be a problem of any sort for Krista or for anybody else, and in particular for the person that wound up, getting rid of those drugs over there. I just wanted to make this as clean as I could. The money is gone. Obviously, these mobsters came, and the story gets even more interesting, all the way from here in terms of the people that were involved from the very beginning with this meeting in the motel. You remember I said there were two people there. There were two people there that Sammy Anarino and Pete Gucci. Sammy Anarino had become a friend of mine because he was over at the restaurant and I saw him. Sammy Anarino got arrested and he got charged with having a hit kit in his trunk. What had happened was some people were trying to kill him. And when they tried to kill him, it was in a car and he wound up somehow, he had been shot, but he somehow, remember, he kicked the windows out of the car, I guess, and he somehow, got away from them. When he was taken to the hospital, they found in his trunk a hit kit. They thought it was a hit kit. It was just a gun with some tape wrapped around the handle, and it was some chloroform, and it was some handcuffs. Gee, why they thought that was a hit kit is beyond me.
What is a hit kit?
No, they were what mob guys use when they go out to do their business. Well, in this particular case, they found in his trunk they found a container, and in the container it was a gun with tape wrapped around the handle, obviously, so they felt there wouldn't be fingerprints or whatever. There was chloroform, and there were some handcuffs, and there was blindfolds, and there was like a blindfold. I called it a hit kit. He had been arrested and charged with that. He asked me when he was at the restaurant, he said, Bob, can you represent me? And I said, sure, that's not a problem. And he said, but I've got Ed Jensen. I was told I have to use him. Jimmy told me I have to use him, but I want you too. I said, he knows the judge, same as I do. That's not going to be a problem. He said, but I want you to represent me. I said, I won't as long as you have him. I said, he's a worthless, I'm talking about Jensen. I said, he's a worthless piece of shit. And because I knew Jensen had been representing people and then setting them up, telling the mob that they were informants and getting them killed. I knew this, and I despised the guy. He did it he wanted all their business.
Getting people killed in kind of the most weaselish of ways by just providing information.
Yes, exactly. I had told you before that I think when we talked about it, that's why I didn't represent any of their, a lot of their felons, because when I had the first burglary case that I got from Marco, I refused to tell him when there was and he told me, he said, if you find out somebody's giving information, you let us know. And I said, Marco, no, I don't do that, and I won't do that. Basically, well, you won't get our business. And I said, then fine, I won't get your business. I said, but I'm just not going to do that. I don't want that in my conscience. I had made that real clear to him, and I never got any more federal work from them, and I didn't want it because I wouldn't do it. But I mean, I just despised him as a human being, and so okay, he leaves. About a day or two later, he calls me and he says, Bob, can I meet you at the restaurant? And I said, and he said, at lunchtime, though. He said, I want to meet you. Can you take a ride out here? But, the restaurant's about 15 miles, from where I am. And so he says, it's really important. So, okay, I drive out there. I sit down and he says, Bob, will you represent me? And I said, did you get rid of Jensen? He says, no, I've got to use him. And I said, Sam, then I can't represent you, and I won't. We finished lunch. I'm talking with Artie, with my partner. Sammy leaves. He leaves the restaurant. He goes about a block and a half away over on Western, and he gets shotgunned right there in the middle of the street. When he left there, they had stopped traffic, and somebody with a shotgun got out, and this time they made sure he was dead. They shot him 2 or 3 times as he was crawling down the street. And what's so ironic about all this, this is the other person who was there, with the Count, initially with the Count. It was the very day, it was the day after that. I'm coming out of my office, and I'm going to get into my car, and Jensen, comes hobbling down the street and says to me, you better be careful. And I said, what? He said, Jimmy Couture is really upset about all those things you were saying about me, obviously to Sammy Iannarino. And the moment he said that, I kind of exploded, and I grabbed him, and Eddie weighed probably about 260, 270. I just took him and I threw him against the wall. And I said to him, you piece of shit. I said, my friends are killing your friends. Don't ever threaten me. And, I think he pissed in his pants. And with that, I just left. I'm minding my own business. I go about whatever I'm doing. That same night, Jimmy Couture was found dead. He had got shot 4 times in the back of the head over there on Grand Avenue, probably about a mile or so, not even a mile or so from, where this took place. You can imagine what Jensen told anybody and everybody afterwards. I had nothing to do with that. When Jensen saw me like a day or two after that, when I was up there at the courthouse up in Evanston, when he came running down the street and he said, Bob, he said, when I told you, Jimmy, I was talking about Couture, not Jimmy Catrone. I was talking about, there's a lawyer in his office with a name similar to that. So Eddie Jensen, I had just said to him, my friends are killing your friends. And the guy that supposedly is upset because, I'm saying bad things about Jensen, that's what built up my reputation, I'm sure, out there in the bad guy world, that I was involved in these, that I was involved in some way. This was the 4th person that got killed after having lunch or dinner with me.
And from what I can gather, just scanning around on the internet, these guys were involved in what was called the Chop Shop era Chicago crime. I'm sure they were involved in a lot of different things, but it seemed like there was a Chop Shop war going on.
The restaurant Grecos out there, unbelievably powerful. That was what happened. Was Artie Greco was a bookmaker I represented. When Artie was, the feds were watching him because he was a major bookmaker, and I had been dealing with him for years and making a lot of money off him. He wanted to open up a restaurant out there.
When you say out there, where's out there?
I think 3020 West 95th Street, Evergreen Park, just outside Chicago. Just outside Chicago, there was this huge restaurant. It was a restaurant, and in front of it was a delicatessen. It was a place called Bruno's. It looked like a barn that was for sale. And Artie was talking about opening up a restaurant. And I felt this could make us, some good money, because Artie's got a lot of friends, mostly, mob friends and all. He was a bookmaker involved with a lot of the organized crime people. We wound up opening up this restaurant. We bought the place. What we did was we bought it supposedly for $200,000, but I gave Bruno $50,000 in cash. And when we opened it up, after a period of time, what we decided to do was get rid of the liquor store and expand it into a much, much bigger restaurant. And we fixed it up real nice. Artie had a lot of his friends that were involved as builders and carpenters and all the rest of it. We made it look like an Italian garden, and it became one of the most popular restaurants in the city, with all kinds of mob people coming there. The mayors from the towns would come there. The cardinal would come there. Police personnel. But what we would also have there, it was real close to the chop where all the chop shops were going on the south side. And on any given day, we had tables full of these chop shop guys, the guys that were, stealing the cars and the guys that were chopping them up. And we also had another table, the guys that were killing them and the guys that were extorting them. And which I always thought was so bizarre is, you see these guys, they're passing drinks back and forth, and yet they know which is which. These are mob guys that are extorting them. These are guys and these are guys that are killing them, and they're all at the same place in this restaurant. No, as I say, it was an unbelievable world in itself over there. I was running around socially with what they called the Young Turks, the ones that were doing the whole New Deal. When Giancana went to Mexico, and while he was gone, that was the time that they started a whole new operation with the mob. It was no longer the way it was, where different ones had different territories. This is when they started the whole New Deal, where everybody grabbed people and they belonged to them, and everybody had to pay street tax. And when they did it the new way, it could not be any territory, because robbers robbed everywhere, burglars burglarized everywhere, car thieves stole cars everywhere, not just in a certain neighborhood. When somebody belonged to you, his name was given. And I was there at the club with Marco when these different mob bosses would come, and they'd come almost every day, and they'd sit down and they'd write down who belonged to them now. This is somebody that's paying me right now, and nobody can touch him. You can do whatever, and I collect whatever I collect, from him, and he belongs to me. That was the deal, and that was the deal that was done, and that's why they wound up killing Jimmy the Bomber, because he didn't want to accept it the way it was, and he tried to extort people that were already on somebody else's list. But everybody that was committing crimes had to pay. Everybody. We're talking bookmakers, we're talking fences, we're talking burglars, we're talking robbers, everybody.
If you were committing a crime, you were paying the mob. If
you're a major criminal, yes, you paid street tax. And I'll tell you what was so unbelievable, like with burglars. When somebody went out and committed a burglary, he had to pay them a percentage of whatever he got. But he also had to use mob fences. He couldn't go anyplace else. He had to use a mob fence. And the mob fence had to pay. And so the only ones who really made any money off any of these things, the major money, were the mobsters. Because they would get an end from the guy, they would get an end from whatever the burglar got. They would get an end from whatever and they had to use the mob fences, and the fence would be paying them. With the gambling, it was even better. What they would do is they would grab people that were booking, and they would give them a choice. Either you become partners with us, or it's a 50-50 partnership. First of all, they would charge them, maybe like a $25,000 fee or something. And now they could become partners with them, where they would call all their bets into a clearinghouse. They would call all their bets in to them. They're responsible for all those bets. If somebody who made the bet, didn't pay them, they still had to pay the mob. And yet, if somebody didn't pay them, they couldn't go out and collect from that person. They had to have the mob go out and do the collecting, and the mob would then take half that money again. And if they went broke, and they did at times during like the baseball season years ago, now they got the money. They had to pay juice on that money. It was unbelievable the way they had organized everything, and I was running around with those people that were doing it, with these guys that are doing the actual collecting.
Over time, when they trusted you or began to trust you, did they tell you more of how it worked?
I'd be sitting there having dinner when they're doing all their business. Or I'd be hanging at the club. I'd be over at the club all the time collecting my money. The deal I had with Marco in particular, I got $1,000 for every case that I handled. And I found out later he was charging $2,500 from these people. But anyhow, I got $1,000 for every case, and Marco was pretty much running a majority of the gambling throughout the entire, not just the city, but around the suburbs and all there too. The cases would take me about 10 minutes. I go into court at 11th and State. That's where the courthouse was, and a lot of times I would have one, sometimes two, sometimes three cases. When I go in there, I'd be out of there within about an hour because I'd be the first case called. I'll always be the first case called, and I'd pick up like $3,000 for that. So I'd be going to the clubhouse probably 2-3 times a week, to collect my money. And I'd hang around there because they'd be playing cards and stuff there, and I'd just be socializing.
What was the clubhouse?
It was on Grand Avenue, maybe about 2 miles west of the city, Austin. It was just west of Austin Boulevard on Grand, and this is where they had tables in there where they played cards all the time, and they had they had a kitchen set up in there where they had a woman coming in and cooking, and there were always 40, 50 people hanging around in there. And Marco had a side office, a section built. It was all walled in. And that's where you'd have these other guys coming in every day, and they'd go in there and they'd sit down and discuss all the business. They were setting up this thing, and I had just happened to be with them at the very time they were beginning it, where everybody was, giving, okay, these are a list of my names. In fact, when I showed the FBI how they were doing that, when I pretended like I was running a gambling operation, so they would hit me for street tax, and Marco would tell me, now if you get grabbed by somebody else, you just give them my name, and there won't be a problem. And if there is a problem, you tell me who's giving you the problem, and we'll take care of it. It was all organized, and it got to the point too where in the courthouses you had policemen referring. When people would get arrested, some of these police detectives, they would get paid for referring. In other words, here's a guy who got arrested. Check and see if he's in somebody's list, and if he's not, you can grab him and you can collect it, and you'll get a bounty. There was like a bounty on these people.
Yeah, I'm confused by that whole. Let's go back there. So, detectives, CPD detectives, Chicago Police Department detectives, were
yes. They arrest somebody. They arrest somebody and charge them with a burglary, a major burglary. What they would do was they would be connected with one of the different groups, and they would contact him and talk to him and say, so and so just got arrested. Check and see if he's on anybody's list, and if he's not, you grab him. And you'll grab him and you'll extort him. Either he starts paying you or something will happen. That's when they were killing those people initially. They weren't just beating them up; they were killing people initially to set an example, to send a message out. So the detective would give this name, and if he already belonged to somebody, okay, so be it. And if he didn't, they would grab him. He now belongs to them.
And the detectives were taking money for providing this information to the mobsters.
Yeah.
So detective would say, hey, here's the detective calls a mobster and says, do you know anyone that's got Steve Jones? They say, no. Well, you can have him. So the mobster would then go to Steve Jones and go, you got to pay me a street tax. And the mobster would pay the detective money for providing the information.
Yeah. Well, it's not quite like that. I guarantee you they wouldn't pick up the phone. They wouldn't call them. They would obviously, if they had any sense at all, they would go meet them.
Yeah. It'd be not as literal as I was stating it, but the detectives were providing information to the mobsters.
They would give the name. And this person, who's connected with the mob, tell his boss, here's somebody. Well, let's do the example like with Elmwood Park crew. The big boss of the crew was originally Jackie Cerrone, but then it became Johnny DeFranzo. And Marco was the street crew boss. So one of the detectives would know somebody, one of the people from, there might be in their crews, they probably had about maybe 200 people in their crews, and some were policemen. Some would be, a lot of them would be city workers because they controlled the whole city, and they had thousands of their people on city jobs and county jobs, not just the city but the county also. They would contact, let's say, Paulie Tanzillo, who was just one of the crew. And Paulie was a detective himself. Somebody else would contact, Paulie and say, we made this arrest, or Paulie made the arrest. He would get a hold of Marco and he'd say, here's somebody. He might even have 2 or 3 names of, different people that were arrested, and check and see if they belong to somebody. And if not, he knows that Marco then will grab them. And Marco would then is supposed to be honest and tell him he's not with anybody else, and here's so much money, or he'll say there was somebody else. No, they've already been grabbed. But what you had too, not just the police, over in the courthouse at 26 in California, you had those clerks that were there. The clerks were contacting people. You had the court sergeant there. He'd be contacting people. You had all kinds of people, part of the court system, that would be contacting people and giving out these names. And that's how they would find. That's how they would find a lot of these people. It was all a business.
Yeah, and everyone's taking a cut every way they can by providing information. Before we wrap up here, it's impossible to put a number on this, but what was your sense of how many members of the Chicago Police Department, in whatever their capacity was, were involved with organized crime?
Very, very small percentage. As I say, in our club, about 12, 14 in our crew itself. And when I say our crew, because I spent most of my time in the business there with the Elmwood Park crew. But what they had too, even more than police, sheriffs, dozens and dozens of sheriffs. They had complete control over the sheriff's department. The Cook County Sheriff, who's got thousands of people.
Does that still exist? Is there still a Cook County Sheriff Department? It doesn't all fall over. It doesn't all fall under Illinois State Police.
No, it's a separate. Oh no, it's a separate unit. In fact, Johnny DeFranzo openly would be over there at Maywood Racetrack with the sheriff. We're the ones who made the sheriff. Dvorak was the sheriff. He was a so-called Democrat, became a Republican only to run because it was a countywide office. But they had, in fact, it was ironic. I remember going into a courthouse one time out there in Maywood, and when I go in there, I see one of the guys that's over there, one of the burglars, and he's there as a sheriff now. And they had just made him a sheriff that week. And I walk in, and he says to me, he was the one standing there having the people go through the metal detectors. And he says to me, Bob, can you believe this? Look at this. Neil, when I say they controlled everything, they controlled everything.
A reminder to follow us so you know when the next episode drops. And please send us feedback by following me on Twitter at Neil Edelstein. That's NealEdelstein. Any and all feedback is welcome. We especially like constructive criticism. A reminder to stay connected for episode 6. We discuss a murder at a jewelry store, the Hillbilly Mafia's activities in Chicago, and Tony Spilatro. Here's the Morse code.